Anger in France over new revelations that the US may have been spying on French citizens. Mexico is also demanding answers from Washington over accusations that it spied on a former president. These are the latest in a series of allegations against the National Security Agency, or NSA. But why would the US spy on its allies? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Just a month ago, the United States was lauding the French for being its oldest ally, but now the relationship is under intense pressure. Reports in France's Le Monde newspaper accuse the US of spying on millions of French citizens, a move President François Hollande said was unacceptable between friends and allies. US President Barack Obama called his French counterpart on Monday, saying the US was reviewing how it gathers intelligence. The Secretary of State, John Kerry, who arrived in Paris the same day, said Washington's goal was to find the right balance between protecting the security of and the privacy of its citizens.
As President Obama said very clearly in a recent speech that he gave at the United Nations General Assembly just a few weeks ago, he said, "We in the United States are currently reviewing the way that we gather intelligence." And I think that's appropriate. And our goal is always to try to find the right balance between protecting the security and the privacy of our citizens.
Well, these are just the latest revelations that lift the veil on US spying activities. Last month, the news broke that the National Security Agency had intercepted the communications of Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff. Brazil called it an unacceptable violation of sovereignty. It was also recently revealed the NSA was spying on Mexico's former president, Felipe Calderón. It gave the US access to his email account and turned his office into, quote, a lucrative source of information. The news that Germany was the most spied on European country was met with a massive outcry. And more widely, European officials also became a target. It was revealed the NSA has spied on the European Union's offices in Brussels and Washington, D.C. Well, let's bring in our guests. In Paris, Elisabeth Moutet. She's a columnist for the Sunday Telegraph. In Washington, D.C., we have Jesselyn Radack. She's the National Security and Human Rights Director of the Government Accountability Project, a whistleblower organization. And joining us on Skype from Bloomington, Indiana, Gene Arthur Coyle, professor at Indiana University and a former CIA agent. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Elisabeth Moutet. A great deal of French sound and fury. Is its anger publicly viewed as being justified?
It's never a bad political move in France to be nasty to the Americans. And Monsieur Hollande had a terrible week last week. He had problems with his Roma family who were expelled. He had various problems with strikes. He had bad reports on the economy, nothing new there. And therefore the idea that suddenly he takes up the cudgels and demands explanations from the United States, this is bound to play very well, and this is bound to play doubly well with his own electorate. So in his, it's a no-brainer as far as he's concerned. This is what he has to do. And the French, if they think about it, on the one hand, they will say, well, why should they be listening to us? But on the other hand, France is a country that has had a tradition of secret police for a long time. Of course, there was Fouché, the police minister of Napoleon, who asked the guard, the concierge of every building in Paris to spy on the tenants. But even before that, we've had a long history of having secret services and knowing that your secret service is necessary. We may not like it, but it's something that we take into account. So, shock, horror, spies, spy. This is it's a combination of why should the Americans do it and, oh, yes, we know that spies do spy.
Well, Gene Arthur Coyle, governments watch each other. They've always watched each other, whether they are friends or allies. Was some kind of line crossed here, do you believe?
Well, it's rather amusing that the French are supposedly so morally outraged. The French intelligence services have long engaged in spying on foreign countries. One of the retired DGSE directors, Pierre Marion, this was 1991, but I doubt if much has changed. When he got out of office, the French had just been caught spying on a variety of American corporations and even putting microphones in the first-class seats of Air France. And he basically defended it as saying, well, we wouldn't spy on political or military information of America, but in business matters, we're competitors. So the French are only behind the Chinese as being rather notorious in the amount of industrial espionage carried on by the French government. So it's sort of crocodile tears that the French president is so upset that, oh my God, someone might be spying on France?
Well, Jesselyn Radack, the fact that everybody might be doing it, does that justify the exercise?
No, I think that is more of a deflection. The fact that other countries spy on their own people or spy on each other does not address the fact that U.S. is engaged in massive bulk collection to the tune of 70.3 million telecommunications a month in France of perfectly innocent people. That has nothing to do with protecting the United States, and that has nothing to do with really gathering any kind of meaningful intelligence on France. It is an overreach, the way the NSA has overreached domestically and in a number of other countries, and I think those other countries are justifiably outraged. And I think our excuse at home that we need to examine the proper balance between liberty and security is really a false dichotomy that's constantly put out there. But, as one of our founders said, those who choose between liberty and security deserve neither. And we need a wholesale examination, but we need to stop this mass dragnet bulk surveillance of every country on the planet.
Well, Professor Coyle, your view on that. We're looking at the scale of it. Is that the issue, that this has happened in the past, but not at this massive scale, this incredibly wide dragnet?
Well, this is probably a good time for me to make the point of it's quite interesting to me that you in the journalistic world, including your own introduction today, takes everything that's being released as having come from Mr. Snowden as the absolute gospel truth. Whenever a government makes a statement about anything, there's skepticism, there's research, but because a document that Snowden supposedly stole from the NSA, which has now been published in newspapers saying 70.3 million conversations were recorded, you all take that as the gospel truth.
Well, with respect, Professor Coyle, the particular figures might be a matter of discussion, but the fact that it happened has been confirmed by the NSA itself on a number of occasions in recent months. But I just want to go to Elisabeth Moutet on that particular point of saying that, is this being blown out of proportion, do you believe, as Professor Coyle would have?
Well, when we say 7 billion telephone communications, who has the manpower to actually listen to those? So it's more that you've got an electronic system that's unbelievably sophisticated, and it sort of captures everything. And I don't think that any human ear has listened to anything unless they find keywords with the first sifting program, because I don't think we do not have the organization to do all this. So in terms of saying this is unwarrantable, there ought to be people ought to be realistic, and there ought to be a framework saying, right, this may happen, and these are the conditions in which you can have redress or you can have communication of what was listened to. But nations will listen to what is going on in the ether because they need to at some stage. So I personally would think that, yes, this is overblown.
Well, Professor Coyle, I didn't mean to cut you off in mid-flow on that particular point that you were making about these allegations are sometimes accepted without question.
Well, particularly since Mr. Snowden has now been residing in Russia 4 months, 5 months, yet new things supposedly keep appearing. I just throw this out for consideration of the Russian intelligence services going back 60, 70 years have a history of false documents, disinformatie, as they would call it. It's quite convenient that Snowden, allegedly from his treasure trove, keeps finding new documents month after month. How is it that journalists around the world know if these documents are actually true and which might just simply be created out of the fantasy of the Russian SVR?
Well, let's go to Jesselyn Radack on that particular point. I noticed you shaking your head vigorously there, but the timing, it is peculiar, it might appear, that these newest revelations are made at the time of a U.S. Secretary of State's visit to Paris. The timing would not appear to be a coincidence, would it?
Yes, no, I think these documents have been released very strategically to coincide with U.S. visits to other countries. I think the professor is incredibly ill-informed and continuing to spin the narrative that Snowden is somehow a spy. I saw him last week. He has not been in possession of any of the documents since Hong Kong, which he handed off to other journalists. And Russia is certainly not controlling Mr. Snowden in any kind of way, and neither is anyone else. The veracity of these documents has not only been unquestioned by a number of people who have the intelligence and technological means to question it. It has actually been verified by the United States and by the NSA itself. So the idea that Russia is creating disinformation and that Edward Snowden is scheming to release documents to sow dissension is ridiculous. These documents are public. They are subject to review by anybody who wants to contest them, and nobody has done so. And continuing to perpetrate the U.S. apologist narrative that Snowden is somehow spying for Russia is just a lame attempt to deflect from the severity and huge breach of trust, not only between America and its own citizens, but between America and its allies as well.
Well, moving away from the question of people like Snowden himself, I'd like to go to Elisabeth Moutet with the basic question that aren't governments fair game? If governments are not able to protect their private documents, if they do not have sufficiently strong firewalls, then surely they have to accept responsibility for what is their mistake.
That's an interesting point, because technically you ought to know that yes, these things are vulnerable. These things are dangerous. There can be some seriously hazardous consequences to the spying, and I suspect that there's going to be some urgent revisions after this incident. Although I don't think any of this comes as news to the French government. I cannot imagine for one second that they did not believe that this was not happening. And I must say, the point that the French secret services themselves have engaged for decades in industrial espionage is perfectly true. We all know this. I didn't know about the microphones in the seats of the Concorde, but I did know that the stewards were gently encouraged by the French security services to listen to conversations on the Concorde. This is well known. It has been written many times in France. And in 1993, the Université de Marne-la-Vallée created France's first economic intelligence chair. And the first professor in that chair was the former head of the DGSE, the French Secret Service. I think that tells its own story.
Well, on that question of industrial espionage, some of the least talked about NSA leaks relate to allegations of U.S. spying on foreign businesses. The Department of Defense has said it does not engage in economic espionage of any kind. But slides from an NSA presentation in 2012 specifically mention an economic motive for spying, along with diplomatic and political reasons. Among the international businesses the NSA allegedly spied on, Petrobras, Brazil's state-run oil company, which is known to have discovered some of the world's biggest offshore oil reserves in recent years. And it's been reported that spying on the Mexican government provided U.S. politicians with reports that helped them plan international investments. And among some of the other companies allegedly targeted by the NSA is the Chinese technology firm Huawei. If there is indeed industrial espionage going on, could this have any kind of justification, Jesselyn Radack?
Yes, I mean, I think there hasn't been nearly enough attention focused on the industrial espionage and the economic consequences. Obviously, look, France may be spying on its own people. That's really between the French government and its citizens. But when another country is doing that, and another country like Russia or China or the US, which has much more manpower and technology to do this than smaller countries, that's a problem. It also makes trade negotiations and corporate negotiations ridiculous, because if one side is cheating and has full information of what the other side's points are, obviously that's not very fair, and I think other countries are right to be concerned about this. I do realize, obviously, other countries, Brazil and France.
You were saying, Elisabeth Moutet?
I'm saying if France spies on her own citizens, I think actually we spy less on our own citizens, but I'm pretty sure we spy on you too.
Well, let's just go on to Professor Coyle on this particular point, on the issue of industrial espionage. Do you believe that governments indulge in industrial espionage? Does the U.S. government do so?
Forgive me if I first comment that it's interesting that anyone who disagrees with Ms. Radack must be ill-informed. As for economic espionage, a distinction must be made between, are you gathering information about large economic issues and doing business industrial espionage? And I can pretty safely say, whether she thinks I'm ill-informed or not, the U.S. government doesn't bother engaging in business industrial espionage, as in if NSA comes up with some trade formula or secret or whatever, that we hand it over to a business. The problem with that in America would be we don't have state-owned companies. If NSA stumbled onto some new design for a computer, who would we give it to? So I'm pretty comfortable in saying, even though I've been retired for 6 years, we do not engage in what people generally understand as business industrial espionage, as China massively does.
Well, Jesselyn Radack, your view on that?
Planning? Probably, but that information is kept within, government circles.
Well, let's go to Jesselyn Radack with her view on that.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think it is kept within our own circles when we do spy on other industries. And I think that's already been proven. If you look at the slides that relate to our industrial espionage of Brazil, it's proven. And I don't think we're giving it away to other countries. I think we're keeping it for ourselves, for our own information. And I think that is the concept that underlies this whole spying activity, which is information is a currency of power. And the more information the United States can gain on other countries, people, and industries, the stronger a position it puts our country in. And I know France spies on us, but the scale of what we are doing to France and numerous other countries around the world is so much larger than what they may be doing to us. And I don't think other countries should have to have the burden of protecting themselves from being hacked by the US or China or Russia. I mean, they may simply not have the resources or technology to adequately defend themselves. I think the U.S. needs to be held to account for lying to its allies and spying on not only them, but their people in a massive dragnet surveillance kind of way. I don't believe that the U.S. Is looking at the content. I agree with the other speaker. I don't think they're listening to the actual content as it happens, but they're collecting the metadata, which can reveal a far greater amount of information about anybody actually than content. I know that may be counterintuitive.
Well, and Elisabeth Moutet, if I may come to you, once again we have this issue of scale. If a government is better at doing this than other ones, then is it at fault by carrying on doing it, is the question.
Well, first of all, I'm a bit offended. I mean, I know we're not quite as big as the United States, but being dismissed like that, we like to think that we're not so bad at spying. It's very true that America is a very technological country, that they send tend to throw reserves at any kind of question, endless reserves, and that's interesting, bottomless reserves. But and the French will do things in a more targeted way, and probably with more human intelligence. Although there's a reason why Europe, the European Union, is building the Galileo network of satellites, and it's not just because we don't like the idea that GPS right now comes from American satellites. It's going to have all sorts of uses that nobody's going to talk about. But it's it is part of life. There ought to be in the kind of, for instance, the way congressmen are being briefed in America on a confidential basis. There ought to be international briefings of that nature, and I suspect that there are international briefings between allies to some extent. I don't think any of this has come to a surprise again.
Well, Professor Coyle,
I don't think it should be out there in the open air,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elisabeth, but we are running out of time, and I do want to get to this very important fact, and that is there appears to have been a sea change within the United States in terms of its policy on intelligence gathering. You had the legislation introduced, such as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that was introduced to protect the rights of civilians while maintaining their security. It was very clearly done. Then you had amendments to that act following the Church Committee reports on mistakes being made within it. But now you have that very same act being used to pry on individual citizens within the U.S. itself. Now, this is very different from spying on governments. It's spying on individuals. Has there been a change in the way in which the U.S. views intelligence gathering, Professor Coyle?
Well, 9/11 changed the whole mentality of what is privacy and what a government is entitled to gather. I'll simply make the point of what NSA had been doing domestically in the U.S. that has a lot of people upset. It was ordered by the elected president of the United States. It was cleared by the Justice Department. It was briefed to the Senate and House Intelligence Oversight Committees. If people don't like that, then you get that policy changed. But I just wanted to make the point, this isn't some rogue operation of NSA going out and doing activities.
Well, Jesselyn Radack, very, very quickly, that issue about the U.S. spying on its own citizens, if there are no safeguards within that, then how can you expect any safeguards to be with the U.S. spying on foreign entities?
Absolutely, I agree. The comment that was just made is completely wrong. The whole reason this is a big brouhaha right now is because it was secret. There was a secret interpretation of the Patriot Act 215 that even a lot of members of Congress were unaware of. NSA admitted that it lied and misled its congressional overseers, and the FISA court is a congressional creature. It's not an Article 3 federal court. So the idea that the FISA court even said we were misled, nobody is doing adequate oversight. And the reason this is a big problem in the U.S. is right now because people are outraged because this all occurred in secret. If everyone knew about it, no one would be complaining about it right now. But all three branches of government, except for the executive, maybe the president knew about it. He kind of plays dumb on this or says, oh, we need to have a conversation now that it's been revealed. But yes, it is very indicative of what we're doing, not only to our own populace, but to that of other countries. And to protect from terrorism, you simply do not need to be spying on ordinary citizens around the world. It doesn't do anything. You're trying to find a needle in a haystack, and you're making the haystack even bigger. It does absolutely nothing other than gather a lot of information that could be used against other people that we don't like within our own country or in other countries.
Well, one must remember
illegal.
that the current president of the United States, then a senator, voted in favor of the amendments to that particular Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. But at that particular point, my thanks to our guests, Elisabeth Moutet, Jesselyn Radack, and Gene Arthur Coyle. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching, and goodbye for now.